Today is episode 3 of our Weird, Wild, and Wonderful Illinois podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Bailey Peets, the Communications Director at the Illinois State Historical Society. And today we are joined by Mark Motsinger. He is the president of the Saline County Historical Society. He is also a board member of our Illinois State Historical Society board. And it's just recently the chairman of the Southeastern Illinois Historical Societies, which is a group that came together that encompasses several counties in southeastern Illinois to merge resources in order to put on events and talk more about southeastern Illinois history. So, Mark, welcome to our show.
Great to be here.
So, you were just telling me a little bit about the Southeastern Illinois Historical Society. How many counties does that cover?
Well, it covers about 8. Basically, I'll start at the bottom and work up. It's Massac, Pope, Johnson, Hardin, Saline, Gallatin, Hamilton, and White.
Okay.
White counties.
And this, like you were saying, it's literally a brand new thing. You just had your first meeting last week.
Last Saturday, and we had it at the Sling Creek Pioneer Village, and we had very good representation from each of those counties, and everybody's kind of excited. And historical societies in the counties are not quite like what they used to be. There wasn't a lot of things going on, and you might have 50 and 60 people at a meeting. Now it's basically a lot of the counties are small and we don't have a lot of membership, so we've decided that the best thing to do is kind of work together. And Southern Illinois doesn't have a whole lot of stuff going on. A lot of the coal mines are shutting down and that type of thing. But tourism is kind of something that we have, and historical tourism is also part of that. And when people come to Southern Illinois and southeastern part of the state, they don't necessarily say, well, I'm just going to go to Saline County because, Garden of the Gods is in Saline County, but you cross the border and all of a sudden you're at Rimrock Trail. And people come to Southern Illinois not to go to a county, but to go to the region. So a regional historic society, I think, is something that is very beneficial for the area.
So with that in mind, obviously, we're here to talk about weird and wild stories from southeastern Illinois. So what is a story that many people may not know about the area?
Well, one of the things that I always kind of like to point out is Southern Illinois is topographically and culturally a lot different than the rest of the state. Those of you who are from the northern part of the state or the central part of the state may not be familiar with what Southern Illinois is like. Southern Illinois is basically, some people call it Illitucky because it's so similar to Kentucky. It's the topography. We have the Shawnee Hills, which is kind of a rugged terrain that is different than the rest of the state, and a different type of people settled here. I noticed that you had a podcast where they were talking about, Bill was talking about the people that settled in the St. Clair County area, and a lot of those were French. The settlers that came into Southern Illinois were mostly from kind of the Appalachia areas, the Piedmont areas of the Carolinas. So it's a whole different type of people with a whole different culture that came into the area. A lot of Scots-Irish, a lot of German. And because of that, it created a whole different culture. This was part of I guess you could say, part of the Bible Belt. The people down here vote different. They talk different. A lot of the people in Southern Illinois have Southern accents. So the whole area is a little different. And you could almost see a line as far as the topography goes, because what happened was the furthest south that the glaciers came in North America was about Route 13 that goes east and west across the state, and it stopped right there. And if you're driving from Harrisburg to Shawneetown, you can literally see what looks like a line of hills. It's flat, and then all of a sudden there's these hills, and the hill country begins. So Southern Illinois is is so much similar to, let's say, Eastern Kentucky or to the Ozarks, that there's not a whole lot in common sometimes with the rest of the state. So a
Mhm.
lot of the stories that we have down here are different.
Mhm.
Uh, the Shawnee National Forest is, I don't think it's about almost 50,000 or 500,000 acres.
Mhm.
A lot of people in Northern Illinois are familiar with Starved Rock. Well, Starved Rock, that area is a lot of people's. That's the huge area of the Shawnee National Forest is almost exactly like the Starved Rock area.
Mhm.
It's people's backyards in Southern Illinois. I look out my back window and I see a range of hills. I'm not too far from Garden of the Gods, Rimrock Trail, and a lot of those areas. So this area down here is a lot different than the rest of the state.
Yeah, actually, I think I read somewhere too that there that part of the state is even more south in regards of it's further south than some quote southern states as far as like where the Mason-Dixon line lines up.
Well, ironically, the capital of Illinois, for people that live in the along Route 13 area and below, is actually further away than the capital of Tennessee. We can be in Nashville quicker than we can be in Springfield. And
Hmm.
if you drew a line straight across the bottom of Illinois, you would be probably in North Carolina is where you'd
Hmm.
be. So the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, was actually further north than lots of Southern Illinois.
Yeah, that's I know we had talked about our ancestors coming to the area and like I said, my family all came from Virginia, so the idea
Right.
that they were actually quote more north geographically than Southern Illinois was.
Yeah, exactly. And they people consider somebody from Virginia as Southern a lot of times. Not everybody does, but a lot of people do. But Southern Illinois is further south than most of Virginia, so
Hmm.
it's an interesting area with a whole different interesting culture.
Hmm. So what's one question I always ask is, what are some of the myths about the area that, people get wrong a lot, or, you know, they assume something and, that's something that as a historical society you're always kind of fighting against, you
Well,
know.
one of the things that a lot of people ask is how the area down here got its nickname. The nickname is Little Egypt.
Hmm.
And if you pay attention to some of the areas on the map, you have Thebes and Cairo and these different areas that kind of have Egyptian names. Southern
Hmm.
Illinois University is the Salukis, which is an Egyptian dog.
Hmm.
You have Lake of Egypt, you have the Bank of Egypt, you have all different types of names that. Like Southeastern Illinois College, their symbol is a pyramid.
Hmm.
So the name Little Egypt, that's one of the kind of controversial things is where it actually came from. But I'll kind of in the research that I've done, basically the name Little Egypt kind of had its start about 1799, and how it got it was there was a preacher, kind of a missionary type Baptist preacher named Reverend David Bagley,
Hmm.
and Reverend Bagley would travel from the Kentucky settlements into Illinois, and he would cross and go over and do missionary work in like Kaskaskia and Cahokia and in those
Hmm.
areas where kind of a French population was a population that a lot of them were Catholic. So he kind of saw it as going into a different type of culture. Well, to get there, he would have to cross the river, Ohio River, and he would cross southern Illinois through what he called the wilderness,
Hmm.
which was an area that was not populated. And he began calling that the Goshen Trail,
Hmm.
which is kind of from the biblical place where the Hebrew children lived in the Bible, uh, in the land of Goshen.
Hmm.
And he would cross the wilderness, get to Goshen, and then he would preach to the people in the French settlements. Those French settlements had the pyramid mounds, Monk's Mound, and that type of thing.
Hmm.
So he would call that area the land of Goshen, or Egypt. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that when he went home and preached about it, it had a really good sound when he preached it. I'm sure, a lot of times you like to have something that sounds good when you're preaching. So I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that preached good. I'm going to Egypt. So the
Yep.
name kind of stuck from that point on, that area was kind of known as Egypt, or Goshen.
Mm-hmm.
And that trail eventually became a road, and it became a well-trafficked road because Shawneetown kind of became the entry point into Southern Illinois. And a lot of people don't really understand why that is, but what would happen was when people were coming from the Carolinas or Kentucky, or even come up from Tennessee, instead of getting on the Ohio River and then going up the Mississippi, they would cross at, say, Cave in Rock or Shawneetown, and then cross Southern Illinois, because it was very difficult to, back in those days with a keelboat or something, to go up the Mississippi. So they would cross across, and so
Mm-hmm.
it became very heavily trafficked, and people began to populate that area. Matter of fact, at one time, when in 1818, when Illinois became a state, the bottom part of the state was where all the counties were at. There were just a few counties that were big, long counties in the north, but all the counties that were in the southern part, because that's where the population was. But and then the name of Egypt became even more popular in the 1830s, when there was a famine, or a drought,
Mm-hmm.
and heavy snow and that type of thing that happened, and it kind of caused all kinds of problems for the people that did live in northern Illinois, and they began to go down to get grain in what they called Egypt land. So
Mm-hmm.
they came down to this area. So the name Egypt is kind of stuck. So that has always been kind of an interesting story, is how it became known as Little Egypt.
So then the town names of Cairo and different ones like that then came after it was already
Yes,
established as Little
they
Egypt.
kind of thought, well, let's find it. We've got a theme here, so let's go
Mm-hmm.
with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we have Meridian, and there's quite a few names that are like that today.
So, and would it be fair to say there's not actually a large Egyptian population in Southern
That
Illinois?
would be really fair to say, yes. Yeah,
So
that
yeah,
has
it
nothing to do with it. Yeah.
has nothing to do with actual Egypt itself, as
Right, right,
opposed to like a
right.
Chinatown or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there was a story one time that there was a burlesque dancer at the Chicago World's Fair who called herself Little Egypt, and
Mm-hmm.
that was how it got its name. But the name came way, way before that, and I really don't think that had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I believe it all sticks to this Reverend Bagley, who came across and pronounced it as the land of Goshen, and
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense than a
Yeah,
burlesque dancer.
yeah, exactly.
So what are some things you can tell us about the history of the area, as far as, like, you talked about the minister coming in and, you know, preaching and stuff, but obviously it had a lot of Native American um
Right.
tribes
In
living down
Southern
there.
Illinois, there's quite a bit of when the first settlers came into the area, it was pretty obvious to them that they weren't the first people that had ever been there. Now,
Hmm.
the southern tip of Illinois had been kind of abandoned for several years. But prior to that, during the Mississippian period and the Woodland period, there was some populations in Southern Illinois. Um, the the area has, there's places that you can visit. Cahokia Mounds, of course, is the most well known, and I hate to say this, and people don't understand this that live in the rest of the state, but those of us down here in the southern tip of the state think of St. Clair County as northern Illinois. That's how far south we are. I know they don't know. They think themselves as southern Illinois. Actually, we think of anything above Mount Vernon as northern Illinois to us. So it all matters where you're at. But down in southern tip of Illinois, we have a place called Kincaid Mounds,
Hmm.
which is right on the Ohio River. Kincaid Mounds is probably the second largest Mississippian village. You can still visit. The mounds are still there. There's a viewing platform. There's not a museum like at Cahokia, but
Mm-hmm.
That's there. Also, we have in Southern Illinois something that's kind of unique, and it's kind of my specialty, and that's the stone forts. And these stone forts kind of stretch across Illinois. They basically go from starting in kind of Gallatin County all the way across to Jackson County, and there's 11 of them.
Mm-hmm.
But these were built during the late woodland period, and they are some of them are very easy to visit. There's one at Giant City State Park, and there's one at Rimrock Trail that you can just about drive up to and look at. So the
Mm-hmm.
stone forts are one of the most interesting things about the stone forts is for years. I think the first one was recorded in 1807 by a federal land surveyor, and he
Mm-hmm.
just called it an ancient fortification. And nobody really understood who built them or why. And so when there's a mystery, a lot of times it's just kind of what people do. They fill in the blank, and
Mm-hmm.
so people just kind of assumed. And so the kind of history and mystery behind the who originally built the stone forts, we have a pretty good idea now or we actually know now because of archaeological work. But
Mm-hmm.
for years there was all kinds of just wild theories from Welsh explorers, from people escaping the Roman Empire to giants, to just all kinds of different stories of
Mm-hmm.
who built these. One of the stories that was pretty predominant for a long time was that they were built by Hernando de Soto and his men. Well, we now know
Oh
that
yeah.
Hernando de Soto didn't come up this far north, but the the stories and all these different ideas behind the stone forts is a very interesting part of the legend and lore here in Southern Illinois, and the even there's even certain groups that claim them as part of their background. The Mormon Church claims some of these areas, and they actually have a Mormon tour bus that stops at the Pounds Giant City to see these walls because they see them as part of their theological background. So
Mm-hmm.
the stone forts are a very interesting part of the ancient history, the Native American history of Southern Illinois.
And to, kind of explore that a little bit further, then, obviously, one of the things, we've mentioned, earlier is, the tourism and people coming down for the Garden of the Gods. How did the Garden of the Gods get that name?
Well, that is nobody really knows exactly how Garden of the Gods got its name. It's kind of a mystery, but we do know how a lot of these sites became popular and how they became. There was a guy named L.O. Trigg,
Mm-hmm.
and L.O. Trigg is pretty much what I would call the father of the Shawnee National Forest. He was a newspaper man who was born and raised around Ozark, Illinois,
Okay.
and he uh, he was really he had about a third generation. His grandfather was an early settler,
Mm-hmm.
and he was not extremely educated, but he was pretty much self-educated, and he eventually became the editor of the newspaper in El Dorado, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at that time, Southern Illinois was fairly populated compared to what it is today. And there were these little farms were all over the place. And some of the places that people would farm was just unbelievable. They'd farm on top of these hills. They didn't really understand, that topsoil would wash away and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Southern Illinois in the 1920s and early 30s was in real danger of ending up in New Orleans, uh, washing into the river because there's so many farms and that type of thing. So L.O. Trigg got involved in what is called a reforestation project,
Mm-hmm.
where he wanted to go in and find some of these places. The farm fields have been played out where they've been planting cord on 6 inches of topsoil and plant pine trees and try to get the forest to kind of hold the land together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the process, he thought, well, I need to get as much information as I possibly can out to people. So he started a little tour called the Trigg Tour
Mm-hmm.
and Trigg Ozark Tours. Well, his first one was called the Reforestation Tour, and he took people like uh, school superintendents and sheriffs and mayors and state representatives and
Mm-hmm.
bankers and people that he thought had a little influence, and they rode around for 2 nights and 3 days on the back of a truck. And he would show them interesting spots, both historic and natural,
Hmm.
in Southern Illinois. And he began to call himself Elo Trigg, salesman for the Illinois Ozarks, but not in a real estate business. It was his card said.
Hmm.
Well, he began promoting this and then realized that um, there was something to this. And he thought tourism is going to be a great way to kind of get Southern Illinois out of its poverty. So he started these tours, and what he would do is he'd ride around all over Southern Illinois, write different people. I understand there's a rock formation near your home. Can you tell me a little bit about it? I
Hmm.
understand there's a historical spot near your home. And then he would go out and scout these places out. And then over the year, he'd look at them and he'd add them to his trip. And
Hmm.
then he would say, okay, I'm going to focus on Pope and Hardin County, and I'm going to focus on Union County. I'm going to focus on Johnson County. And he would take people, and he did this for almost 20 years.
Hmm.
And during this time, the Shawnee National Forest was developed. He would visit CCC camps and places like Garden of the Gods, where Anvil Rock was located, and today Camel Rock, and then places like Stoneface became popularized because Elo Trigg advertised them and took tours to them. And
Hmm.
eventually they became these well known tourist spots that we have today. So that's kind of how all that got started.
So, and just for people that might not have been down there, is Garden of the Gods part of the Shawnee National Forest, or is it a separate?
Garden of the Gods is part of the Shawnee National Forest, yes.
Okay.
And the you have what you have in the Shawnee National Forest is you have the Shawnee National Forest, but you also have designated wilderness areas.
Hmm.
And these designated wilderness areas are are under the jurisdiction of the Shawnee National Forest. However, they have some little different rules, maybe on the hunting rules and that type of thing are a little different, the
Hmm.
logging rules. But we have places like Bellsmith Springs, uh, Burden Falls wilderness area, the
Hmm.
Garden of the Gods wilderness area, and places like that. They are designated spots within the Shawnee National Forest.
Hmm. All right. So, kind of looking back over the whole history of the area, what would be something shocking that people would be interested in learning about the area? Something that, you know, you don't necessarily think about Southern Illinois when you think of
Well,
this.
one of the things that a lot of people don't think about Southern Illinois is the area about from Evansville to Cairo along the Ohio River was what some people called the landlocked Caribbean. It
Okay.
was a it was the home of river pirates. So much so that at one point, for about a 40-year period, there was actually a replica of Cave and Rock at Disney World in Florida.
Wow.
And those of you who've seen and remember some of the older movies, How the West Was Won was
Hmm.
filmed along that area. Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, Davy Crockett and the keel boat race during the 50s were filmed there. But that area along there before statehood was kind of a lawless area that a lot of people that were considered landlocked pirates,
Hmm.
highwaymen, counterfeiters would patrol the area. And what's probably the most well known is Cave and Rock, which is today is a state park.
Hmm.
Cave and Rock is the one that I mentioned was they had a replica of at Disney. But what that place was used for was basically it was used as kind of a tavern. Um, and it had different names throughout the time. It was Wilson's House of Ill Repute,
Hmm.
Wilson's Liquor Vault, that type of thing. And the pirates used that kind of as a headquarters, and so there was literally piracy along the river there between Evansville and Cairo,
Hmm.
and they didn't always just operate out of the cave. The cave was kind of a spot where travelers would always stop, maybe buy supplies, you
Hmm.
know, visit the buy alcohol. But the piracy that took place there was more of a they would kind of look and see what these guys had on their boats, on their keel boats.
Hmm.
Well, they also knew that Southern Illinois was being filled, and I can get to that in a little bit, with a lot of old soldiers, a lot of
Hmm.
retired soldiers. And if you've got a group of ex Revolutionary War soldiers or ex Indian fighters, you might want to leave them alone.
Yeah.
But if you have a kind of a family by themselves or something like that, this was easy prey. So what they would do is they would find us out at the cave. And if you ever visit the Pioneer Village in Harrisburg, we actually have this particular cabin. It's been removed to the Pioneer Village, but on a bluff by Elizabethtown was a small cabin known as the
Hmm.
Pirate Cabin. And that cabin could see about a mile or two up the river. So they would get word, hey, there's a keel boat that's coming. This keel boat has got a lot of furs, maybe whatever on it, and
Hmm.
it's just got maybe one family, and so it's easy prey. So this boat, this they would get information about this boat to the house, and then the house could see up the river, but then around the bend was what was known as Hurricane Island, and
Hmm.
the chute came very close to the end of the island, and they would signal the island, and then they would attack the boat as it came down that chute.
Hmm.
Now, that is kind of how they operated, and they would they attack them. There was all kinds of kind of famous rivermen that were there. Samuel Mason was there. Even what History Channel calls the first serial killers, the Hart brothers were there
Hmm.
for a short time. They were so cruel that they even got run off by the pirates. They had a tendency to just kind of do things that were bringing too much attention on them.
Hmm.
And ironically, if you go across the river in Kentucky, there's a spot called Harp's Head Corner, where the Kentucky militia caught up with the Harps and actually killed one and cut his head off and put it on a pike, and
Oh my
and
gosh.
that whole area today is still known as Harp's Head Corner.
Hmm.
But the piracy and the kind of lawlessness that took place along that part of the Ohio River is kind of unique to that area.
Hmm. And you mentioned Cave and Rock. I mean, I'll be honest, the only thing I know about Cave and Rock is really there was famous murders that happened there.
Famous what
There were
murder?
famous murders that happened at Cave and Rock.
Yes, that's where the pirates were located,
Hmm.
and a lot of the murders probably did not actually happen at the cave, but there is the story that what got the Hart brothers run off
Hmm.
was the story is that they were just cruel and they just enjoyed just doing some horrible things, and they had captured a flatboat,
Hmm.
and the captain of the flatboat, they thought it'd be funny to strip him naked, tie him backwards on a horse,
Hmm.
and blindfold the horse.
Hmm.
So they took the horse up on top of the bluff where the cave's at, and
Hmm.
they slapped the horse on a rear end, and the horse ran and flew off the bluff and killed both the horse and the man.
Hmm.
And the rest of the river pirates, Samuel Mason and that group, they were in it for the money, not necessarily for cruelty.
Hmm.
And they decided, you're bringing too much attention to us with all this stuff, so they ran them off. So that's
Hmm.
that's probably some of the famous murders that you're talking about. We also know that a place called Saline Landing, which is just a little bit up the where the Saline River runs into the Ohio River, just a little bit up from the cave. That is a spot where the Hart brothers kind of befriended uh, three rivermen, three trappers, whatever they were. And
Hmm.
while they were sleeping, they killed them and robbed them. And sometimes they'd kill them and rob them for a sack of flour. I mean, they just, I think they enjoyed. They were just very very cruel people,
Yeah.
and eventually they. The story is too that the smaller harp was eventually got away after his brother was beheaded,
Hmm.
and he got away and uh, eventually turned on Samuel Mason and tried to sell his head
Hmm.
because he had a bounty on it, and they recognized who he was when he was trying to get the bounty on Samuel Mason, and then they hung him. So
Hmm.
uh, eventually, the the settlers were able to run these pirates and these rivermen out.
Hmm. So, with all of that activity happening there along the river, um, would there be any like paranormal activity? Is that a high paranormal aspect with ghosts and folklore and all that?
Yeah, there's a Hardin County has some of the deepest paranormal stories of any place that I know. There's a there's a cave that's known as the Bixby Cave,
Mm-hmm.
which was a woman by the name of Anna Bixby, and her story is a very interesting story too. And she is credited as the person who figured out what was causing the milk sickness that killed people like Abraham Lincoln's mom
Okay.
and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the story was that after her husband died, she married another man who was kind of a scoundrel,
Mm-hmm.
and he tried to kill her to take her money. And to this day, they say, and she was able to get away by falling off a cliff. And to this day, they say that there's the Bixby Cave is there, and it's the money's hidden inside, and people are constantly seeing what they call ghost lights and that type of things that run up and down Rock Creek.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's some wild stories about different things. Rock Creek has a lot of paranormal activity. There's stories about I never have quite understood this one, but a carpet bag that would appear in the middle of the road and chase the people down the road. Uh, but a lot of people think that the reason that there's so much paranormal activity in Hardin County has to do with the geology of the area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of people don't realize there is an extinct volcano in Illinois, and this extinct volcano is known as Hicks Dome,
Mm-hmm.
and it is located on the Hardin Pope County border. And it helped produce what is known as the state's mineral, which is fluoride.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that this has caused a lot of like seismic type activity and that type of thing that's caused these ghost lights and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that a lot of people believe is causing some of this paranormal activity is these minerals that are in the ground.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it sounds like it's a really active site, but you also mentioned that there was still money maybe hidden in some of these caves. Do you see a lot of like treasure hunters coming down still looking for that?
The treasure hunters is a very popular thing in this area. We have there's It's not just the Anna Bixby gold that people talk about. There's we have a place called the Knights of the Golden Circle, which
Mm-hmm.
is just not very far from where I live. The Knights of the Golden Circle is it's a more or less a natural arch that is kind of a shelter cave.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is that the Knights of the Golden Circle, right before and during the Civil War, would meet there,
Mm-hmm.
and they did it in secrecy. And a lot of people, the story is that they had before they were eventually run out, they had buried some gold there to
Mm-hmm.
support their projects, the Knights of the Golden Circle. A lot of people don't realize that Jesse James and those guys were members of the Knights of the Golden Circle also, and that was a pro-Southern group
Mm-hmm.
that wanted to see a golden circle of slavery, which would include the South and Mexico and Cuba and those kind of things. And that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of their end. And some of the money that they had set aside for that is supposedly hidden there. Uh, Southern Illinois is also uh, every one of not everyone, but most of the stone forts have some kind of a lore or a legend concerning gold as well. There's a War Bluff, which is one of the stone forts in Southern Illinois, is in Pope County,
Mm-hmm.
and it is believed that there's gold there, and you can still to this day see where people have been digging trying to find it. Uh, there was the story of a cannon filled with golden coins found inside the wall at Stone Fort Bluff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's right. These nooks and crannies that are all over the place here in Southern Illinois have all kinds of stories about mysterious things that are within them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in other words, come down to Southern Illinois and look for the lost Confederate gold.
That's right, and or Anna Bixby's gold, or the gold that the Spanish left when they were through. There's all kinds of stories, um, and of course there's also the infamous Burroughs Cave story,
Mm-hmm.
which for years a lot of people couldn't quite figure out where it was at, and we're getting way up in northern Illinois, up around Albany and Mount
Mm-hmm.
Vernon, and At least that's how we look at it.
Yeah.
But there was also some people that thought that the Burroughs Cave was in Hardin County as well. So,
Hmm.
you've also got that story. And the Burroughs Cave is kind of a story about a cave that supposedly had a bunch of like Egyptian and Roman treasures inside of it.
Hmm. So, pretty safe to say you haven't found any though.
No, I've never found any of that. No, no, it would be nice. Now we do have in Saline County a what was known for a long time. They called it the Lost Silver Mine.
Hmm.
Um, I wouldn't really call it lost anymore because I could walk you right to it, but it's in a very difficult to get to place at the bottom of Stone Face.
Hmm.
And during the 1870s, it was an operating silver mine,
Hmm.
and it just looks like a hole in the ground basically. But they got down about 50 feet and they were mining silver ore out of it, and they hit a spring and they couldn't
Hmm.
keep the water out of it, so it was abandoned. So there was some silver mined here, but the biggest thing that was mined in southern Illinois was the fluorite.
Hmm.
And at one time, about 90% of the fluorite that was used in the United States all came from Hardin County,
Okay.
and it was used heavily for stuff in World War II, um, everything, and it's considered a rare earth mineral,
Hmm.
and that comes it's because of the volcano Hicks Dome.
Hmm.
That's what's caused it, and it's called the Southern Illinois Fluorite District.
Hmm.
Um, Back in the 90s with NAFTA, it became cheaper to buy it from Mexico because they also have it in Mexico. There's a lot of volcanic activity in Mexico.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the union fluorite miners were getting, paid, $30 an hour or whatever. And the NAFTA could go down, and because of NAFTA, you could buy it in Mexico for miners that were making $3 or $4 a day.
Hmm.
And so it kind of shut the places down. And it kind of, in some ways, kind of turned Rosy Clare into kind of from a booming town into kind of just a sleepy little river town now.
Hmm. So, alrighty. Is there anything coming up in Saline County or within the Joint Historical Society group that
Well,
you would like
what
to let us
what
know
we're
about
trying
within
what we're
county?
trying to do, we're trying to kind of get ready for the 250th anniversary. We're kind of trying to work together a little bit with that. Um, we've got some big plans of possibly what we're going to do in Old Shawneetown.
Hmm.
Um, Old Shawneetown is considered. I'm going to ruffle some feathers here, but I'm going to explain it before I get. It's considered the oldest town in Illinois.
Hmm.
However, it is not the oldest. It's the oldest incorporated town in
Yeah.
Illinois. Other towns have 100 years before them, almost like
Hmm.
Kaskaskia and those. But Shawneetown was actually incorporated by the federal government, and it was started by the federal government as a place for land leases. It was to administer the Illinois salines with a salt. At that time, at the time of the Illinois Territory, 1/3 of the state's income came from the Illinois salines, which is just outside of Equality, which is how
Hmm.
Saline County got its name. And so Shawneetown became this booming town. Everybody that entered into Illinois came across the river at Shawneetown. The first ferry was there in about 1802. The federal government put banks there. They put uh, uh, federal places for the land surveys. But probably the most interesting story that's out of Old Shawneetown is and a lot of times people think it's just a legend, but there's actually truth to it. In the 1830s, the it was the only federally backed bank in the state of Illinois. So a
Hmm.
group of guys came down to borrow money for a town pretty much where Chicago's at today.
Okay.
And the bank decided, hey, you're too far away.
Hmm.
We can't administer it. We don't have any way to get you to pay it off. Plus, you're way too far away from the river. You're up in the middle of nowhere.
Hmm.
Uh, that area is never going to amount to anything, so we're not going to loan you the money. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, today, Shawneetown is a town of about 150 people, and we all know what Chicago is.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an interesting story. But Shawneetown is where we're wanting to do a lot of our 250th anniversary stuff, and because it's such a historic town.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the salt mines down there, obviously you said that's how Saline County got their name.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about the Crenshaw House?
Okay, the Crenshaw House. That's kind of a sore subject for a lot of people because it's been kind of sitting there and kind of withering away over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some exciting developments that's taking place that I really can't really say much about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there is a plan afoot of restoring it,
Mm-hmm.
and so it looks pretty favorable. It's fortunately the IDNR purchased it several years ago, and it has sat there for a long time. But in the early 2000s, they employed the Center for Archaeological Investigations at SIU to come in and do kind of a historic survey of the place,
Mm-hmm.
which is normally a good sign. And the wheels of government kind of move slow,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of came in and wanted to kind of looked at how the house would have looked in the 1840s to return it back to that state,
Mm-hmm.
to where kind of what other buildings were around there, and it's just kind of sat there since then. But the word is that there's going to be some exciting developments take place at the Crenshaw House. Now, for those of you not familiar with what the Crenshaw House is, it was also known as Hickory Hill or the Old Slave House,
Mm-hmm.
and it sat on a hill, and it was about a mile or so from the salt well, but you could see across the river valley there, and you could see the salt well at one time from the house.
Mm-hmm.
And the builder of the house is going to be John Hart Crenshaw.
Mm-hmm.
And John Hart Crenshaw was the administrator of the salt wells, which is owned by the federal government. And what they would do is they would get a contract to run the salt wells. And the contract also included just hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest,
Mm-hmm.
because the way they would do these salt wells were basically they would dig down into these salt springs and create a well. Then they would dip the water out, and then they would boil the water, and they would get salt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Native Americans have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years
Yeah.
prior to that. So
Mm-hmm.
and matter of fact, they've even found, mastodon bones and things like that around some of these areas where the megafauna were coming in and licking the salt wells as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when the federal government got a hold of it, they would contract people like John Hart Crenshaw. And what happened was that it was pretty hard work. So John Hart Crenshaw would hire people. He had a lot of free people, but he would also lease African American slaves
Mm-hmm.
from slave states. Now it was illegal to have slaves in Illinois after 1824, but he could lease them, and so he would lease them from slave states, and he'd keep them for a certain amount of time. And because of that, there's all kinds of rumors that he was working with the reverse Underground Railroad,
Mm-hmm.
and that slaves were kidnapped and brought into work. There's not a whole lot of record of that, but we do know that African American slaves that were released from other places work there. Recently, they have discovered that the third floor was not necessarily it was always considered the breeding room and all that. We're kind of finding out that it was probably a house behind the Crenshaw house where they house those people. But I think when they do come up with when they do open it back up, hopefully before too much longer, the whole story will probably be more amazing than some of the made up stuff.
Mm-hmm. And because it was on federal land and not necessarily Illinois land, that kind of was the loophole that allowed him
that was the loophole. And they couldn't own them technically either.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was on federal land, they could use slaves. So they would literally rent them, and they would be brought up for a certain amount of time. Now, there was also a lot of free blacks that worked there too. A lot of free blacks and free whites. One of the, if not the oldest African American community in the state of Illinois is over by a town called Cary Mills, called Lakeview.
Mhm.
and a lot of those people would come over and work some at the salt wells.
Mhm.
It was kind of a place where people could earn some money, even and and there was not a whole lot of other places in Southern Illinois where you could actually earn some coins. So a lot of the people
Right.
came over to work there.
So, alrighty. Well, thanks for being with us today. It's been a great conversation, and we hope everybody can head down to Southern Illinois and check out what you guys got all going on down there.
If you haven't been to Southern Illinois and seen the sights, you definitely need to.
Yeah. All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much.